about 10 minutes, and I was like, okay, sit me down. I'm like, show me how you do this particular, like a bar chart. And he like just, you can see him like hovering over like icons and stuff. And I was like, oh, have you done this before? And he's like, oh, I've done it in theory. And I was like, when you say theory, I'm like, you told me that you've done all this. He's like, yeah, he's like, I've studied it all. But he's like, in my previous workplace, he's like, someone else did that. Like the
We've both had interesting experiences outsourcing functions to overseas teams or individuals. And I think it's a really good conversation because what I think is the next wave. I mean, it's the current wave is still outsourcing, right? But people talk about this next wave being AI automation and AI being able to do jobs of teams and people. But I don't think a lot of companies are there because they haven't set up their businesses or processes or teams to even confidently transition that work offshore. And I feel like there's some synergies that will connect between offshore work and AI, but we'll come to that in a second. But you've had experiences offshoring work from a finance perspective recently. I think when we were both at one of our previous employers, we worked with offshore finance functions. I've done a few things in that space as well, but I'm sure a lot of leaders are constantly thinking about how they do that well now. So what's some things that you've learned and what are, I guess, key pillars that you think leaders need to be thinking about?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, look, I think the more recent ones that I've done is been in that data space. So yeah, look, I'll go into it though. Initially, the decisions were purely cost driven, right? I think we're gonna.
They always are, right?
Yeah, that's how it started. But that was the main thing of ticking that box and just moving across. But really, it was about like what type of role and what are you trying to get out of it. And I think that was really unclear when I started this journey of like, hey, look, what are we actually trying to achieve? I had created a new role effectively, and I said, like, the options were, oh, it's going to be 40% cheaper to go offshore, and everyone just ticked the box, right? So, because it was a new role, it was really difficult to see what that could actually handle and do. And so there's no defined guidelines. There's no defined, like induction guides. It was just send a laptop and hope the best, and
What country did you do this in?
India for that one.
India?
Yeah. So initially I had, So initially, actually, we look at it, I met up with the recruiter. We found it. So I did it twice. So I once tried to get a Power BI developer, and they said, "Oh, Bangalore's the place to be." So got a person in Bangalore. I was like, "This Power BI guy has, after 6 months, I was like, has got no clue."
Yeah.
Just straight out lied in his CV about everything. It turns out he was part of a much bigger team, right? So it was really about now learning from what questions you're asking in the interview. So firstly, when I interviewed, I was like, have you done basic Power BI visuals? Like, yes. Have you done basic data transformations? Yes. Have you done this? Have you done a bar chart, line chart? Yeah. I've done everything. I know how to convert data from Excel. I can put it into Power BI. I can publish it into a Power BI service, right? Like, so yeah, I'm like, okay, cool. You understand the basics. Happy days. Got him on. I was like, all right, load the data in, convert it, just do a basic transformation and get me some visuals. And for like 2 weeks, like heard nothing. I was like, all right. I'm like, then one day I was like, you've done your induction. Like that's a week. But I was like, what did you do for the other week? And he just like sat there awkwardly, like not knowing what to do. And I was like, okay, like share your screen. Maybe it's a connectivity problem. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Went through. And then I started like just showing him stuff, like basic stuff. And I was like, what's going on? Gave him some more time. I was like, maybe just a bit nervous. Showed him some examples. I'm like, all right, here's an Excel report that I have. I want you to convert this into Power BI. Like, do the best you can, but convert it for me. Exactly as it is. I don't want you to do anything else. Just convert the charts for me. And like that went, I was like, how long do you need? He sort of said, 1 to 2 weeks. So I'm like, all right, give you that time. Come back to me. Give me updates if you're struggling with anything. He just went silent once again. 2 weeks later, I came back and I was like, how'd you go? because I've heard nothing, I assume that things are being done. I'm like, show me what you've done. He had like one chart open that would have been done in about 10 minutes. And I was like, okay, sit me down. I'm like, show me how you do this particular, like a bar chart. And he like just, you can see him like hovering over like icons and stuff. And I was like, oh, have you done this before? And he's like, oh, I've done it in theory. And I was like, when you say theory, I'm like, you told me that you've done all this. He's like, yeah, he's like, I've studied it all. But he's like, in my previous workplace, he's like, someone else did that, like the building. And he's like, I colored in the lines and the bars.
Yeah.
I was like, mate, we got a dud. I was like, oh, unbelievable. So I'm like, what did you actually build? He's like, he goes, nothing. He just colored in, like, he goes, oh, they want that line purple. So he'd go and color all the lines in purple and whatever it was. I was like, mate, a color palette does your full-time job. I was like, oh. So I had to have a conversation. I'm like, look, you're no longer required here. And I was like, all right. I'm like, screw this. I was like, I'll stick to another thing. The other part was I was like, all right, let me get now an SQL person. And, having tried to negotiate a few SQL people, like I really need a data cleaned up. I'm like, Power BI is not the right platform for data cleaning. Let's go to SQL to really clean it up, build those really powerhouse queries. And, the guy had an interview, spoke really well, seemed to understand everything. But once again, you just hit radio silence all of a sudden. Then when I give him a basic question, I'm like, oh, can you transform this query for me? He'd then just ask that same question back to the onshore team because he didn't know how, like, he didn't know what he was doing. So he'd just be like, I'm like, oh, can you transpose this query to this? He's like, yes. I'm like, okay. Do you understand it? Yes. I was like, okay, cool. Then all of a sudden it's like, hi, like, Lawrence. And then like, all I hear is like the other person on my team being like, oh, why is he bugging me about this stuff? He's like, I've already explained this. And I was like, yeah, like, hey dude, like, why are you going back to that person? It just turns out that guy had no idea. So he was just forwarding queries back and forth. I'm like, what did you previously do? He's like, oh, I've done all these transformations. I've done everything else. I was like, are you sure you've done all this? Because I was like, over the Christmas break, I'm like, no one's in the office. So I know you're not working on anything else. I'm like, go and understand these queries and come back with questions. I'm like, just go and study the queries, see where the data's coming from. And I come back from the break and I was like, hey, look, how'd you go? He's like, yeah, I understand everything. I was like, okay, cool. I'm like, transpose this and join this, and I want to see this output. He's like, hi to the onshore team. I was like, unbelievable. I'm like, why do you keep saying yes? You understand everything. And it was just a force of habit for him just to say yes.
Yeah.
And then he'd just go out and like then start hustling everyone else.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, he's like, I tried to reach that person, but they didn't respond. I'm like, oh, forward me the email, like with all the detailed requirements that you've sent out. Like you said, hey, look, I need help with this particular query, these columns I don't understand, and blah blah. Yeah. He's like, oh, I didn't do that. He's like, he shares his team message, and he just says like, hi, person's name, and he goes, that's me trying to initiate contact. And I'm like, that doesn't count, man. I was like, you can't just be like hi and just wait. And I'm like, did you just write hi and just wait there? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, are you kidding? Like, I'm like, that's not on. I was like, I'm like, there's a huge significant time difference here. I'm like, you can't just write hi and just wait. I'm like, he just waits for like a whole day. No one responds and he carries on to the next day, right? So those are two mega screw ups. The next time around was third time lucky, I suppose. Decided to go. We had already an existing function in Mumbai. And in this case, the reporting team were being transitioned across. So 2 heads I had provisioned in 3 heads now offshore. Yeah. So still a saving in salary cost. But that was way more defined, right? So I had really, when I say way more defined, it was defined in the sense of like, hey, come here, press this button, roll over the file, change these dates, roll over the file, download these extracts, right? So very much more prescriptive. But I ended up getting... I had interviewed people, I had shortlisted my own people, but then I got recommended by the finance team who had already got an offshore person there. They say, hey, get the finance person, like the finance manager that's already offshore, to interview your manager. And I had 2 people that I'd shortlisted. And I was like, all right, I'm like, either one I'd be happy with. Told her, she interviewed both, and she said, yeah, like this bloke is a clear winner. The other one actually has no real tangible experience. You just all talk. But she had sifted that out, whereas I couldn't actually feel any of that. I was like, amazing. And then I was like, all right. Then I got recommended to, from the EGM going, actually, since you've got the manager now and everyone's sort of happy with it, you're happy with him as well, get him to also buy into his team. Make sure that he's buying into his team. So then you're not just chucking in with random people. Oh, okay, that's a really good idea. So I already had gone through a first round. Then I got a second round interview with him and the potential team member going, this is going to be your manager, have your questions sort of supervised. And he actually suggested going, actually, I'd test people based on my interviews. He's like, I want to give each one a test. So he built his own test, tested out the person because they're data analysts. He's like, this is your homework. Come back and send it to me. And out of I think about the 5 to 10 people we interviewed, the 3 I really liked, they're the ones who ended up getting the job. They're the ones who actually passed that test. But I was like, at least the manager then had confidence in the skill set that they were, producing. So I was like, that's worked out well. We had a transition period from, the Australia team to the Mumbai team now. And a lot of it was just really like, hey, screen share, record, do the steps. Screen share, record, do the steps. It's about how do we get that output out really quickly. We had roughly 10 days to hand it over. So it wasn't ideal timing, but we had 10 days. So it was all about just, it was all VBA or macro. So hit this button, download this extract, paste it in here, hit the run button. Run, the output should produce. So that part worked really well. What the challenge became is when that client extract, when you're downloading it, the columns change, or a new column's been added, or some restructures occurred within the clients. The data automatically screws up, and as a result, you hit the button and things aren't working. And that's where you don't have. I got Power BI people trying to transition all these reports across from VBA, but the reality was the existing infrastructure wasn't there. So now these guys are now having to deal with troubleshooting VBA, which wasn't their, core skill set. Their core skill set was to convert reports across and transition, but now they haven't had time of having to go back and go, this isn't working. It was working last month. It's not working this month. What's changed? Go into each individual column ID, like data. So they've really stepped up beyond how I could have seen this in a really good way. But I've also seen it work terribly, right? So that part was, really good. They've been asking the right questions. And in a short amount of time, I think they've learned the business well enough from a data point of view. They may not fully understand all the ops terminology and the acronyms everywhere, but they're asking like basic questions like, if you're pushing a CV through, like, if you push, you've opened a job, you've pushed 3 CVs through, how can you have a placement without having an interview? And the program manager's like, that's a one-off. That's just a one-off. Like maybe there's a manual transaction. And he's like, okay, but that doesn't explain. If that's a one-off, then how do you explain 1,000 of these happening over 3 months? And he was like, you didn't tell me that. And I was like, well, did you know that? Because that's been happening for a while now. It's like, someone should have flagged that with us. So we're like, we're telling you now, like there's a problem here.
Yeah.
They've really taken it to another level where they're actually true business partners, but they're now having to work on these SOPs. Yeah.
Is that so? You're working with a company in India, so they kind of manage the offshore function.
So they're within the Manpower Group function. Okay. So the Experis is a brand. So we use Experis. They recruit it, but then it's like an internal temp, if that makes sense.
Okay. So they have their own kind of career pathways and stuff there.
To an extent, because I'll still be managing them day to day, and what's going on, and I'm meant to be having a sort of like an annual appraisal and all that sort of stuff with them. So
so
it's obviously
a very technical skill set that you guys are hiring. Key takeaways from, I guess, that experience?
Yeah, definitely key takeaways. For me, it's don't get the loan ranges, right? Like while they seem really cheap early up front, it's really hard to determine how they operate.
Yeah.
And I think for me that was a really key one. So try
when you say loan ranges, are you talking about like people that haven't been validated?
No, not validated.
Like 5 years or upward kind of people.
Yeah, like in that sense, like as in, if you're going to go offshore, don't just hire one person.
Yeah.
And don't just say it's a full-time work from home sort of
Yeah.
environment. It doesn't really create that environment they need to
Yeah.
sort of thrive in.
Yeah.
To see if you can do multiple people, ideally in the same area, and ideally they should have an office or something to go to so they can feel
Yeah.
as part of a team. So
Yeah.
initially I had everything in Bangalore, but actually the finance team sat in Mumbai. But this time around, when I stuck everyone in Mumbai, now they're doing a hybrid work from home. Now, the 4 that I have, they can go into the office and they can see other people as well, right? So it just
Yeah.
creates you're part of a bigger thing. You're not just
That,
stuck to your
that's
screen the whole
actually,
time.
yeah, it's super important as well, because when we did our stuff, we hired people in Fiji, India as well. A lot of those countries have things like, sometimes the power goes out randomly, or
Yeah.
all sorts of issues happen. And usually your home setups aren't built to cater to things like that. And so office settings usually have things like generators and
Mm.
all these other backup plans. If,
Mm.
there's a power outage, those usually start to kick in. And, from a cost perspective, it usually saves you as well, despite the fact that you're also paying a markup on occupancy for those
Yeah,
services.
correct. Yeah, absolutely. So I think like that's going to be the main thing. Like, can you fit them into a bigger team of some sort? If that doesn't exist, that's different. Like, and it's something you
Yeah.
can work towards. But definitely try to get them all sort of located in a similar area. Have that sort of hybrid environment. The second one, it's going to be try that the testing. I think it's pretty critical, right? Like, having had 2 different people, and I had technical people on my interview panel, and they're like, "Oh, what do you think of just basic IT questions?" They're like, "Well, how would you approach this particular problem?" And they understood it and they answered it correctly. But what that didn't do was actually this validated that they understood theory. When it came down to practical, they had no idea. So chuck them a basic test, see how they operate. Um, let's say if it's a Power BI example, get them in the Power BI sort of space, go build me a dashboard. All right, here's a data set, build me a dashboard. This is what I sort of expect to see. You can give them instructions, see how well they respond, and on a
And you do
timely
that in
basis.
the interview stage?
Yeah, do the interview stage, right? So once you've had the first interview, if you like them, give them a test, see how they operate. Basically, then you'll see how they interpreted emails, how they actually perform, and can they do it on a timely basis, right? So I think that's a really good way to validate. And then the third part's have those open and frank discussions, early on, right? So initially I was sort of giving a lot of grace period, just being like, hey, look, they're new, give them a bit more time, they'll pick it up. But have those really formal sort of check-ins to come back and say, look, this is my expectation that you do this in this particular time. And if they are doing it, great. If they're not doing it, one of your expectations need to go down, but figure out what the gap is and see is that something for the next month you can work on to close out, or is that just going to hang around? And if it hangs around for consecutive months, have the discussion of, hey, it's not working out. Let's cut this earlier. So my 3 key
Yeah,
takeaways.
that's good, man. And I think, I guess, because it's a very technical skill set, a lot of your output is very evident early on.
Mm.
Whereas from a finance view, kind of your output is really at a month end, as an example.
Yeah.
And, if you don't have a good month end, then you always will give them another chance at another month end. That's like an 8-week process, right? You almost don't get to see a proper result until after that. It's really hard to test stuff like that too. You're almost testing for soft technical skills, like can they use Excel productively? Can they, problem solve through a spreadsheet, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas technical is you almost can, a similar test to what they do for onshore people, you can almost give to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I bring back down the finance path, it's your ability not just to, if you want someone to follow a set of instructions, the ultimate test whether or not something's going to work, I think, successfully offshore or not, is to just hand it to a random person within the organization and say, you run it.
Yeah.
Based on the instructions I've given you on this Word document or PDF or PowerPoint or a Teams call, you run this next process next month or next week. And based on that, small handover you've given, if they can't run it, there's a gap. And if someone else can't run it onshore, don't expect the offshore team to run it because they have no idea. They don't know this industry. They don't know anything better. So you've almost got a robot that's just come in initially to take on a thing, but they're just following instructions. So if your instructions are poorly worded or ambiguous and unclear, you're going to expect a dodgy output. And that is a challenge. I think there's a lot of documentation gap that actually occurs. And I saw this in the handovers as well. Like when I was doing sort of the Australian handovers, was what you think you've done because you're typing up notes, and the video recordings. There's just chunks of steps missing, and because it's just assumed, right? Like, traditionally do copy this and paste this over here. That's not documented anywhere. That's only documented. Like the fact that I've told people go screen share and record what you're doing because I know there's always gaps. Like, that's how we pick that stuff up. But aside from that, some of that stuff was like, oh, we've already cleansed the data. I'm like, no, we needed to see that cleansing of the data. I don't want to see the cleansed data because now we've got no idea how to go from raw data to this output.
Yeah.
I don't know what you've chopped. I was like, oh, no, it's the same process each month. I'm like, clearly isn't. That's why you haven't recorded it, right? Like, so it's just trying to,
Those documents or those SOPs, standard operating procedures or whatever, are really important as well because a lot of offshore solutions usually have a bit of turnover.
Yeah.
And that's because they usually go to the highest paying bidder, right? And as they get a bit more experience, they try and jump. And so the tighter those documents are, the documentation of those processes are, it's easier for someone to just come in and pick it up very quickly. So you have to almost predict that you're going to have a new person doing it every month.
Yeah.
And so your documentation needs to be tied with that.
How did you deal with change like that? So like then do you have your temps internal or were they through an offshore company? What was that process like?
Well, so I've tried both with a company and with individuals. So this is for specific functions in either finance or in kind of a sales / call center type of role. And I definitely think the office or the company version worked better because they had a sense of accountability and responsibility there in a way where I couldn't provide. And also a sense of team and camaraderie. And there's obviously the things that we mentioned before around having an office set up. But those definitely work well. But I can see how some wouldn't mind having an individual there if it's just for specific, social media management or whatever, or VAs. They're happy for them to work from home. But each to their own with that. But I think the first point that you mentioned, that last point that you mentioned, around clearly documenting, processes, that's meant to be the core of your offshore solution. I think as well, so this is one of the points that I have, is planning not just the task to be done, but planning an entire kind of month or a week of what their work is going to look like. Because one of the things that I struggled with was I knew they had a peak of work, which is like a month end or whatever. But in the middle, I found myself trying to think after I hired them to be like, oh, what work can I give them? And I was almost just giving them work to keep them busy. When really that all should be planned outside of time, right? And even if they're not busy, you should be able to think of things that you can potentially give to them. And if they're not utilized, then there's other teams in the business that may be able to utilize them.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think is key. Planning the task to be done. Like you said, have someone maybe do it onshore first and make it easy to transfer to them. And, make sure you avoid the need to get them busy-itis. So often happens with offshore people.
I think for me was the other side of it, like, have the doers that, do all the stuff. Like, for me was having that report, like for me, having that management, like that higher up sort of chain of command was critical. So like you're then now dealing with one person, not four people. At least someone's there to sort of alleviate some of that pain. Initially, when you're dealing with people directly, sometimes they can't, explain the frustrations or challenges or roadblocks that they're having. And for you to have like a local manager there that can deal with that, at least you can know there's a fresh pair of eyes against the same sort of challenge that they've got. And it could be a quick fix and some of that might not be. So, at least they can sort of pool resources, try to figure things out. And the other part's probably going to be like, that's the management, the other one's going to have, while you got the doers, have someone who can think, right? So the team I most recently got, I made sure they were all super curious. That was really critical for me to have. Like I didn't need people that can just push the buttons. I needed people that were gonna push the limits. So I was trying to hire not traditional sort of offshore role people. I sort of went, this is what I'm after. I'm after the next thing. And everyone then got on the same page. They fully understood where I was coming from. And I said, the current processes don't exist. Like I wanted to set out that platform for them. I'm like, don't like, as in, because it was just a mess. So I was like, don't come in here, me having all the answers. I'm like, I don't have all the answers. So if you're after that environment, if you really thrive in that, this is not the right workplace for you. What I'm after is people that can take on something for a short amount of time, really rip into it, break into it, get back to root cause problems, and then build me a brand new solution. Okay, if you want to be part of that, then come join this team. If you do not want to be part of that, that's not your core skill set. Like I'm being very honest right now. Do not. You're going to hate your life here.
Yeah.
And this team really embraced that. They all look forward to that challenge, which breath of fresh air, right? Whereas some people, they like the routine stuff, right? And it's nothing against the routine stuff. Some people thrive in it, some people don't. But it's making sure you understand which ones are which. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard as well, though, because in a lot of those cultures and countries, the way you're educated is through rote learning, essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so you're not taught to naturally be curious and think for yourself. And so I'd find a large majority of people, they might have 2-3 degrees, but they're all very mechanical in how they operate, which I think is natural. And it's important for people to remember as well, because we can set these expectations on those teams. And, you might, like you guys, have the opportunity to get a team full of them, but more often than not, you don't. And so I think it's really important to set them up with processes that are mechanical to start off with. You can obviously get people that can challenge processes and stuff down the line, but don't give them situations or scenarios where they're made to think outside the box too often at that start. You want to be able to create capability and then evolve to roles like those.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're talking about documentation.
Yep.
Do you have things like flowcharts and I guess workflows and scenarios where if you don't know this answer, this is the person you go to, or if you get stuck here, what happens there, that kind of thing?
So straight up transparency, I'd love to have those things. Have not for the most recent one, haven't had that. We had a basic sort of diagram. What I did was sort of work with the clients that we have. So we have program managers with our external clients. They became, I already told them about the change that was happening. So they got across it. So there's going to be a refresh of all the data and all the insights and reports. So, but I did say there's going to be a bit of a learning curve. So I said there's the existing process, which has been documented, but what we're going to need is the new version of that, of what the data means and what the columns are and the new dictionary. So I did say to the offshore team, hey, look, this is what I expect to be built in the future. Like you've already got the instructions to push this button and push that button and download these extracts. But the reality is we don't understand necessarily what we're downloading and what we're publishing as well. So I said we need to bridge that gap. So, but I did say the best way to do that is going to be to work with those program managers to find out, what's the purpose of that report? How are you using it? Why are we sending it? What's the meaning of that calculation? So now it became a thing of almost partnering with the client and figuring out, when I say client, like the program manager for the client, and figuring out really like, what are you doing with this? Why is it important? Like, are we working it out correctly? Are there errors in the existing file? And it all became a real partnering element for that part.
Yeah. Nice. It's, all baby steps, like you said, right? You kind of need to walk before you can set up those systems. And a lot of, even the tech companies and startups, they all kind of start small and they evolve those offshore functions to, big and beautiful things through investment in kind of this onshore management and onshore thought.
Yeah.
To build out those sustainable processes as well. The other thing... Sorry,
go. Have you used flowcharts before? Like, how did you? What was your process around it when you were building out your process?
That was more. We created that for this sales and call center environment. That was more around who to talk to if you had a question in a certain area, or if you had to refer someone who you spoke to. Clearly outlining who they need to go to,
Yeah.
instead of that becoming then a obstacle or a roadblock because they need to come to me or someone else to say, who do I talk to for this? So we kind of had to map out all those scenarios for them. Again, extra documentation, extra work, but very necessary, and helped us to think through a few things as well. The other thing you mentioned and you touched on, which I think is really important, is documenting expectations and targets or goals. I don't know what that looks like from a tech view, but from a sales view, we had, as an example, like calls per day or calls per week, and engagement levels. We're trying to test that. And from a finance view, it was having your work done by a certain day or time, to a certain quality that we were continually measuring them on. How do you do that from a tech standpoint?
Yeah, interesting. If we're talking about like data as such, what are we doing is like, because we have already a schedule of reports that are meant to be going out each week, right? So we can actually sort of measure going like, did those reports get sent out per the agreed time frame? So I think that's one thing. Then the next part is about effectively quality and what's changed and how do we deal with that those deviations. So in this particular case, I set up a Jira ticketing system just to find out what was going on. So we just loaded up every single scheduled task, and now I can see the tickets that have been closed, the things that have been opened. But what I'm noticing is, there's one major client, there's way more ad hoc tasks that I've ever expect, just because it's like, oh, what's that number? What's that number? Or what's this? Oh, I need this. This is really urgent. The client wants this. I'm like, that's just shed so much light, because I'm like, actually, that was meant to be, 80 reports a month, but those 80 now consume all this additional time. That's almost a full head count allocated to one client. And I was like, we're not even getting reimbursed for that, right? We're forking it out ourselves. So actually, were people aware? And I was then trying to create that light going, are you guys aware? Like the sales team, like this is what it's costing overall profitability. So it's initially it's about just time. I think time and how long queries are taking, but with data, it's very, very difficult to figure out. Like if you're break, you must have stepped into VBA a decade ago, right? But VBA, like when you're decoding someone else's VBA, you're going into someone else's mind, because that's how their head operates. So they're going through like some sort of transformation or ETL. For you to understand what's going on and why certain things have happened, that takes time. So one query may take an hour, the other one may take you 2 weeks, literally, to figure out. So that's what I'm struggling with right now, to grasp what's considered normal in this case.
Yeah.
So,
And that's where AI comes into play, right? Because people think AI is going to help you solve or do things for you, but this is where it helps connect the dots, because in situations like that, helps you problem solve much quicker to understand someone's code, as an example.
Yeah.
But then you still keep using an offshore function, or you still keep using your onshore function to still do the work. You're just doing those things much quicker in the middle that normally you'd have been stuck at.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely valid, right? Like, I think there's probably a point in time where I'm like, are offshore teams needed? If the infrastructure has been set up correctly, in my view, with AI, and you've got all the things lined up. Personally, I think you could limit it. Limit that style of use, because everything would have actually been system driven and data driven. Where the challenge becomes a lot of systems aren't linked. As much as everyone thinks it's all on the one platform and everything works, usually it doesn't. But they make sure it looks like it is from the from outside in, everything's linked, but it's actually someone, pushing and pulling data all the way across the systems, right? So, but I think if you do go down the offshore path, it's really about, why is it there? And are they going to take you on that journey of they're just going to continue pushing those buttons up until the day you tell them we're done here? Or do you want them to partner with you to come back and say, hey, look, we're currently doing this process. Do you want us to investigate how to make this better? Or, you can have that style of conversation as well with them. It just depends on the appetite and the type of individuals you get.
And you're usually paying more premium dollar for that kind of talent as well. So again, it depends on what your investment in, and that's my last point, is doing your ROI kind of analysis, even if it's a back of the napkin, because there's times where I've had offshore functions who I've felt have been at 40 to 50% productivity. Then you actually do the maths, and it's like it's actually just cheaper. This is one of the things we actually had at my old workplace was we had an offshore function, but it worked out that it's just a bit more expensive for me to have 2 grads onshore to do that work. They had a team of like 10. It's gonna be the equivalent of me having 2 grads onshore doing that work. Yes, it's going to be slightly more expensive, but my quality of work and my control of that work is going to be much better. And I'm also going to go through a process where now I'm building that team around everyone else, and there's a sense of, I guess, team spirit and growth that happens at the back of that. So important to do that regularly as well, I think.
No, absolutely. I think it's suppose it's your point in time of what your ROI is, right? If you're just driven just to get that EBITDA number as high as possible, right? Like it makes sense going, let's reduce that cost, right? So, but that cost comes with that time impact as well. So while you may be saving 50% of that salary cost, let's say for this example, it's $100,000 you're saving, someone's got to manage that from a time difference point of view. Someone's got to manage that from something else. Like it does impact. There are other ramifications that never get thought about, right? And you sort of hand-holding, trying to go through some processes over and over again, thinking that whatever you've handed over has now been documented, but it's not. Like it's all those real gaps. You end up repeating yourself over and over again, right? So it's like just trying to figure out, I think, even for yourself, what that impact looks like. Does that mean you're working longer hours now as well, trying to make sure everything's across the line? If you do bring it back onshore, absolutely, like you've got control, but like you need people, I think, in my view, you'd at least have one sort of seniorish person. The reason being, you want someone there to join the dots, right? Because you're not always there to join the dots for them, right? And some people can't do that, or you don't want them to do that. And there's some people you go, actually, I really need you to come back and join the dots and see where the natural efficiencies are. Can you make things better? Because that ROI is going to improve with that. You actually have, having to factor that in as well. So,
good conversation points, man. I'll summarize this in our description in the comments so people can follow and jump to the past that's relevant to them. But something that's relevant to you, Ash. Tigers playing their first game this weekend.
Mate, there you go.
Teams have just been announced. Have you seen the team? What do you make of it? Playing the Raiders away, the Tigers, on 3 p.m. 3 p.m. Saturday.
Yeah, I quickly briefed through the team lineup. Look, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Like I said before, like I think I'm curious to see how the teams sort of gel, how they perform, and if there's been any good learnings. I think the hardest part is now just gelling together, like, as a team. And, I think they've removed a lot of the clutter of, the individual performers. So, yeah, fingers crossed. But whether or not they've got enough experience to sort of take it along the line, that's going to be challenging. And I think how they recover from setbacks. Tigers have always suffered from that over the last decade. Like, it's one try, they would have been pushing the whole, let's say 40 minutes, or, let's say 50 minutes, one try from the opposition because of one screw up. And then Tigers switch off for the next 15 minutes and, get absolutely annihilated in that time. And there's no way to recover then, right? So it's how you recover, come back and say, that screw up, it's already happened. Let's push forward again, right? So
yeah. We watched the Raiders play Newcastle in Newcastle last week.
Yeah.
They're a solid side, man. Big mobile forward pack.
Yeah, huge.
I think Tigers have a tough game on Saturday. Especially with a rookie. I think you got a rookie 5'8", Lachlan Galvin. I don't know if he's played before.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting his name to pop up. So
yeah.
So
be nice to see, man.
What's your tip? Nothing to say about it. Too early for me. Give it a few matches under Benji's belt. So I'll have to say, did he get everyone on the same page or not? That's going to be the question.
Raiders 30 plus.
Oh, mate, no idea. I hope not. I want to set the tone initially properly, but I'd want them, even if they lose, I'd be okay with that. I think I want them just to have a good, solid match as a team together. Look, they haven't had that, right? So it's pretty rough. There's no individual, I'd say, X factor players in my view. there'd be a good cohesive team. You don't have the equivalent of like a Walsh or someone else like that, or like a Latrell Mitchell, right? You don't have that style.
Bro.
Yeah, like absolute gun, but it's just like they'll have to give them the opportunity, right? Like whereas I feel like those X Factor players can just pull something out of the hat randomly, right, throughout the game. That could change something fully dynamic. So I think that'll be an interesting part to see how they all perform. But I think Appy's got a huge job, right? Like Coruscant's just got to gel everyone back up right together again, right? There's no room for, this screw up, that screw up. Everyone just, start walking off on management or doing whatever, right? All that's been cleaned out.
Yeah.
Back to basics, man. Back to basics.
That's right. There you have it, guys. If the Raiders win 13 plus, Ash is going to shave his beard.
Mate, what's wrong with my beard? I just really clipped it down like 2 inches on the weekend. Oh, how good. I'll whiten my teeth. Get some Get some veneers, mate. Get some veneers. Damn. That could be a next topic, huh? How did the veneers go?
That's right.
Oh, good stuff.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Cheers, Ash.